Hello, welcome to this December the 11th Azure Advent Calendar presentation. I'm going to be covering Azure Front Door today. So my name is Jake Walsh. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm over at JakeWalsh90. Also have a website, jakewalsh.co.uk. Please do feel free to reach out. Anything you see or hear that you'd like to get more information on, anything I can help with, don't be a stranger. Let me know and I'll do my best to help. So just to give you an idea of what I'm going to cover in the video, we'll be looking at an overview of Azure Front Door. We'll talk about what it is, what it could do for you. I'm then going to move in and look at some of the features. So we'll talk about specific things that the product can do. We'll look at pricing then. So we'll discuss, how much is this going to cost you? How are you charged? We'll then look at use cases. So I've got a few specific examples of scenarios where this would be a great product for you to use. Then got a demonstration. So we'll look at, how you get set up, some of the things you can do, and then we'll go into tips and tricks. So just a few sort of things to help you perhaps get started, or things if you're already using a product that might make things a little smoother and easier for you. And finally, I've got some resources just to help with some background information and those sorts of things. So let's start with an overview. So Azure Front Door service enables you to manage global routing for your web traffic. It does this by optimizing for best performance and global failover to ensure high availability. Front Door allows us to transform our web applications so we can make them more robust, more reliable, and we can get that high reliability our users and consumers expect. Just looking at some of the services that Front Door offers, so it's resilient, we can lose an Azure region. If we look at application performance acceleration, which I'll come on to in a few minutes, that, for example, leverages the Microsoft network, one of the largest backbone networks in the world, over 100,000 miles of cabling, used for services like Bing, Dynamics 365, Azure, Office 365. So let's take a look at some of the features in Azure Front Door. We have application performance acceleration that utilises the Microsoft Global Network. We can increase the availability of our web apps via smart health probes. That allows us, for example, to route users to the site that's working if another goes down. We have URL-based routing, multiple site hosting. We can do session affinity via a cookie. We can look at SSL termination. We can add our own custom domains and our own certificates. We can also do application layer security, URL redirection, URL rewrite, and we have support for native IPv6 and HTTP2. So who might be interested in using Azure Front Door? It's all well and good me talking about it and giving you an overview, but really we just need to ascertain who's going to benefit from using the service. So I think anybody who currently uses an application delivery controller hosted in the cloud could benefit. So be that NetScaler, F5, Kemp, a lot of the features and things on offer are very similar. Anybody who wishes to accelerate and optimize their web applications, so perhaps you want to take advantage of these services just to give a better experience for your users. Anybody wishing to take advantage of the Microsoft network for their web apps would benefit as well. Let's say, for example, you've got users who are geographically a long way from where your application is hosted, and you want to leverage the Microsoft network to speed up that experience for them. Anybody who wants to run web apps without the worry of managing downtime events is likely to benefit as well. Let's just take, for example, perhaps a company that has a web app in one region and wants to spin up a secondary copy of that app in a region a long way away, just for resiliency, and then use Front Door to fail over. So let's take a look at those features in more detail now. So starting with application performance acceleration, which uses split TCP-based Anycast protocol to connect users to the nearest point of presence. It uses the Microsoft Global Network to connect from the point of presence to the application backend. So this eliminates bottlenecks between the end user and the application. If we think about the traditional scenario, a user would access the application directly over the public internet. In this case, using application performance acceleration, the user connects from their location to the nearest Microsoft point of presence and then over the Microsoft Global Network. So it takes a large portion of the public internet out of the equation and thus improves the performance. The next feature I'm going to talk about is smart health probes. Now you're probably familiar with health probe monitoring on various applications and suites designed to keep an eye on services and alert you or fail them over when they go down. It's exactly the same in Front Door. So health probes monitor applications for metrics like latency and availability, so that if there's a failure condition, that failover can be automated if a service goes down. There's two real main benefits to this: that you can run planned maintenance without downtime, and those unforeseen issues can be mitigated as users are directed to alternate services. So let's say a region goes down or we have a problem with the service, our users don't see any downtime. So there's two types of health probes in Front Door, a HTTP probe and a latency probe. The HTTP probe uses a HTTP status code, so anything other than 200 is considered a failure. And the latency measures the time that the service responds in. Anything over the threshold you've defined is considered a failure also. The next feature we'll talk about is URL-based routing. So this allows path-based routing against our web application. So for example, let's take the scenario of a web app where we have 5,000 users, 4,500 of them guests, and 500 users who actively log in. Perhaps we want to route those different requests to different areas of the site to different back-end pools. This eliminates bottlenecks because we are able to scale more efficiently, we can direct our traffic to the right place, and we can use complex patterns for catch-all routing. We can also host multiple sites in Azure Front Door through a single front door configuration. So that gives us a much more efficient topology. We're not dealing with lots of different configurations for lots of different sites. We can also direct multiple sites to a single back-end pool, so whatever best suits your needs really. We can also configure different domains on the same front door service. Front Door also supports session affinity. Now this is done using managed cookies. So for example, if a user's in a session accessing our website, let's say for example they're in the middle of a transaction, what we don't want to happen is a user to refresh the page and then it appear that their shopping cart's empty or the state of their session's lost. Particularly important for transactions or applications with a high degree of interaction and customized content. So within Azure Front Door, we're also able to do SSL termination. So we can terminate this at the edge, that's the entry point to the Microsoft network, without the need to have a HTTPS connection all the way to the application backend. Connectivity between Front Door and your application backend is supported both over HTTP and HTTPS. So if you've got requirements for security reasons or compliance, you can still have HTTPS end-to-end. Front Door also supports custom domains and certificate management. So a custom domain name, for example, if you want your customers to see a brand name they're familiar with, looks great when they're accessing the website. We also have support for HTTP and HTTPS on those custom domains. The only thing to note is if you want to use HTTPS, you do need to upload an SSL certificate. So next up we have application layer security. So this is a product within Front Door itself, the web application firewall, and we can use these rules to protect our websites from exploitation. So things like filtering on client IP, country code, and various HTTP parameters. Worth noting as well that Front Door itself is protected by the Azure DDoS protection. Front Door is also a layer 7 reverse proxy, so only the traffic that's destined for your web application that you've configured is going to get through. Everything else is dropped before it even reaches your application. Front Door also allows you to do URL redirection, so you can do HTTP to HTTPS redirection, so making sure nobody accesses your site over HTTP and they're automatically redirected. You can do that redirection as well on multiple different levels, so whether it's protocol, hostname, path, a specific query string, and all the standard types are supported, so 301 permanent, 302 found, 307 temporary redirect, and a 308 permanent redirect. We can do that redirection based on a number of variables. So we can do HTTPS or HTTP only. Perhaps you want to redirect in specific cases like that, or we can match the request. So whatever comes in, we can redirect. Front Door also supports URL rewrite, and this is supported by configuring a custom forwarding path. As well as this, Front Door allows us to configure a host header to be sent when the forwarded request reaches the backend application. This is useful when the backend application likes to know that the traffic's been forwarded to it. I know I've worked with some applications in the past where you have a load balancer involved, and that can be a bit problematic unless you tell the application the traffic has been forwarded. And finally, Front Door also natively supports IPv6 and HTTP2 traffic on an end-to-end basis. So next up, I'd just like to briefly talk about pricing. So Azure Front Door billing is based on the following: outbound data transfer, so that's data out of the point of presence to the client; inbound data transfer, so that's data coming into Front Door points of presence from the client; and routing rules, and those are the number of routes you've got configured on your Front Door. So outbound data transfers, just quickly on this, there's different costs for the first 10 terabytes, the additional 40 terabytes, and then from 100 to 150 terabytes, and it's worth just noting that there are different costs based on the geographical zone that you're in. Again, inbound data transfers are charged at a standard rate, and routing rules, the first 5 have a cost, and additional rules have a slightly different cost moving forward from there. And then there's front-end hosts or custom domains. The first 100 are free and additional domains are charged. And then there's the web application firewall. This is an additional module you can enable if you wish, and that bolts onto your front door service and has a monthly cost associated with it, and then costs for the various rules and rule sets that you apply. So finally, just to look at the flow of the pricing, because I think this is important to understand that there are multiple elements to Azure Front Door when it comes to pricing. So you start with your outbound data transfer. That's tiered, dependent, and on the zone in use, the geographical zone that is, and that's charged per gigabyte. The routing rules then come into play. Remember, the costs drop after you have 5 or more rules, and that's charged per hour. Then we have the inbound data transfer, that's charged per gigabyte. And then we have front-end hosts or custom domains. The first 100 are free, and then there's an additional cost thereafter. Finally, if you require it, there's the web application firewall. That has a unit cost, a rule cost, and a cost per request or managed rule set, and that gives you your final monthly bill. If you are considering Azure Front Door, it's worth just looking at this and working out to give you an idea of what that bill is going to cost, so you can have an accurate idea of what your ongoing billing is going to look like. So that's enough about the numbers. Let's have a look at use cases. So let's briefly talk about use cases. I would argue anybody that hosts a web app in Microsoft Azure could benefit from the Front Door service. Whether it be optimizing delivery by offloading SSL, getting your users into the Microsoft network at the nearest point of presence, anybody who wants to scale up their web app, or anybody who has a business, for example, looking to expand globally, the use cases are wide-reaching. There's also a lot of benefits to using Front Door, like the distributed denial of service protection, the web application firewall, the affinity rules, health probes, the fact that we can utilize Anycast via the Microsoft Global Network, the fact that we can get our users into that network quicker. We also have the option to scale up, so let's say you're a small business, at the moment you might just be one web app in one location, but using Front Door and routing your traffic through it, you can grow that web app and get the users in and accessing the service in the best possible way as you grow. So next I'm going to show you a demonstration, and this is a web app load balancing demo using Azure Front Door. So my lab environment, very simple, 2 WordPress sites in 2 completely separate deployments, one in North Europe and one in East US, with no Front Door service. So here we have no resiliency, no failover, no monitoring. What I'm going to do is take this, I'm going to set up Front Door to act as a front end, and I'm just going to demonstrate some of the setup features and talk you through the setup. So as you can see, I'm logged into the portal here. I've got my 2 app service plans running, both WordPress, one in North Europe and one in East US. I'll just show you what those look like. They're not configured in any way, shape or form other than to allow me to identify which is which. Once you've got your web apps in place, it's just a case of going to the portal, doing a search for Front Door, and then hitting the create. So the first step is to create a front-end host. This is the point that we'll be using to access the Front Door service. So let's pick a nice Front Door name. We next need to decide if we want session affinity and we need the web application firewall. I'm going to leave session affinity disabled. I don't require it for this demo, and I'm also going to leave the web app firewall disabled. Once we've added that, we need to add back-end pools. So these are the services that host our web apps that the front end will be accessing. What's great is if your web apps are already hosted and you can access those via your account, you can just point it straight at these. So you can see here I'm selecting the app service, I've picked my subscription, and it already knows the name of my applications and the ports and services that they're running on. So let's add that. That's number 1 added. Let's add number 2 now with exactly the same configuration. Okay, so we've got our 2 backend pools added, and they've got the same priority and weight, which means they'll be given equal amounts of traffic in the load balancing. What we now need to do is look at the health probe. So these are what Front Door uses to determine if the service is healthy. I'm just going to put index.php in here because I know that's a valid page, and I'm going to have that accessed over HTTP. I'm going to leave the interval at 30 seconds. You may want to lower this if this was a production option. I'm also going to leave the load balancing settings as default because really I just want this to fail over when one of the sites is down. And finally we need to add routing rules. These define how the front-end hosts connect to the back-end pools. I'm just going to call that default. I'm going to have HTTP only. We've already got our front-end host, we've already got our path, so this is the default. It catches everything. We're going to do forward, and it's to our backend pool, which contains both of our WordPress sites in our app service plans. For this test, I'm just going to use HTTP, and I'm going to leave URL rewrite and caching disabled. Okay, that's everything. So we now have a default front door configuration set up, and we can go ahead and create that. So here you can see the overview screen of the Azure Front Door service we've just created. You can see the front-end host and the URL the users will use to access the application, and we can access the designer to make changes to the config. So let's test the URL to start. So you can see here we've been directed to web app 001, which is in North Europe. So what happens if we shut that web app down? Well, in theory, we should be redirected to web app 2. So let's test that theory. So here's my app service plan, and I'll stop that now. So we just need to wait a small amount of time for that to take effect, and then we should see all access getting pushed to web app 002. And there we have it. After a short period, the monitor detects the site is down and pushes all traffic to our East US web app. So now that we've configured Front Door, we can make a few additional changes to our rules. For those of you familiar with WordPress, you'll know that WordPress has a login page. Now you'll see it's hosted on wp-login.php. Let's say we want to restrict access to this to protect our web application. We can do this using a rule within the Azure Front Door configuration. So we start by going to the Front Door designer, and then we add a routing rule. We start by giving it a name, and we add a path. I'm going to forward it to our backend pool, so to the same servers, and I'm going to match the request. I'm also going to use URL rewrite, and in here I'm going to put a custom forwarding path with a page I've previously set up. So we just click add on that. We now need to apply these changes by clicking save. So now that the front door configuration has been updated, we can test this. So here's our web app, and I'm now going to try and log in. As you can see, I've been redirected to a different page. You could use this as a holding page or provide information as to why you don't access a login, or if you wanted to, you could redirect users to a completely different website. So now that we've seen the setup and a quick demo of what Azure Front Door can do for you, I just want to talk about a few tips and tricks I've picked up along the way. So number one really is to test your monitoring. Any service like this really is only as good as the monitoring underneath it. If your monitors aren't looking at your web apps in the correct way, if they're not detecting that they're down, then really you're not going to see the benefit of this. It's also important to note that Front Door is not going to fix poorly performing web applications, so these need to be fit for purpose and then deploy Front Door. Don't deploy Front Door thinking it's going to solve those problems for you. Worth just noting, make sure all your rules are tested, do a full end-to-end test as an end user, try out all of the things an end user would try, and then try it again. It's also worth considering preventing direct access to your web applications and only allowing access via Front Door. For example, the demonstration I gave you where we blocked access to the WordPress sign-in, if a user knew the URL to go direct to the web app, they could circumvent what we've configured in Front Door. And finally, reach out. Don't be afraid to speak up and reach out to the community. We're all here to help. Finally, just some resources. I will include this in the blog post that goes along with it, just to help you get started, and a few things that have helped me with this presentation. All that remains to be said is congratulations for making it to the end, and thank you for watching.